and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all okay and not doing too badly in this really crazy time where we're all half lockdown, not lockdown. But basically it is May, and May is EDS Awareness Month. And when I started doing this channel, I vowed that I would make it about a lot of different things. But one of the things that I really wanted to include was about my conditions and my story, and I never really got to do much of that because of sort of the timing of how things fell. So I thought, it's May, it was the perfect time to do a video about EDS. So EDS stands for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and basically they are a group of conditions, and there's 13 types. And they're genetic disease. So I'm going to do a bit of first of all I'm going to explain a bit about what EDS is, how it affects people. I don't claim to be any kind of expert in this area, but I have lived with this condition my whole life, and I'm just going to tell my story because I think that it just needs masses more awareness than what it gets. There's a famous quote by, I think it's Professor Rodney Graham, and it says, "No other condition in the world has been neglected like that of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome." And I just think that's just such a big statement to make, and it's so true. I can't even tell you how true it is and how many fights that I've had to come up against in relation to my EDS and all of that. So I'm just going to jump in. Basically, this is a bit of a story time. I've considered doing a Q&A, but then I was like, you know what, I think it's going to be easier for me to get across factual information this way. So basically I'll just start from the beginning. So EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I've already said there's 13 types. They are all genetic, so all of them have a specific gene or a few genes that are known to cause the condition, apart from one, which there's some they're still trying to find out which genes cause that type. That is the type I have. So I have type 3, which is hypermobile EDS, which is a stupid name because it insinuates that it's just being hypermobile, and it's so much more than that. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to call it type 3 just because it's so much easier than saying hypermobile EDS. So I'm going to really talk about that type because that is the type that I have, but there is far more than just that type. There's lots and lots and lots of different types, and they all affect people in very different ways. So this is my experience. Everyone's experience is different. Basically, EDS, long story very, very short, is a genetic disease that causes dysfunction of collagen. So collagen is a protein that you have in your body. It is in pretty much everything. It's in your organs, your joints, all of your soft tissues, your skin, your blood vessels, it's in everything pretty much. And so therefore the condition affects pretty much everything, which is really great. So the way that this was first described to me, and this is the analogy that I'm going to use because I think it's a really good one, is that normal people who don't have EDS have bodies that are held together with super glue. So everything's quite stiff and tight and strong, and if it gets pulled or really has a lot of trauma hitting it, it will break but it would take quite a lot to do that. So if you pull it, it doesn't stretch, it doesn't move around massively easily. It's quite strong, rigid, and that's basically a normal person. A person with EDS, I was described as my body's put together with chewed up chewing gum. So it's really stretchy, it's really fragile, it's really breakable, and it causes a lot of problems because it doesn't hold together very well. And if you're trying to knit it back together, it's really hard to knit together chewing gum as it is super glue. It's easier to stick super glue back together than it is trying to stick chewing gum that's been chewed and pulled around back together. So basically, EDS affects your whole body, as I've just said, and therefore It can cause a wide variety of problems. Some of the main ones are problems with joints, problems with the gastrointestinal system, and problems with other organ systems. So there's quite a lot of vascular issues, problems with bladder, problems with uterus if you're a woman, there's problems with skin and healing and recovering from things, problems with the autonomic nervous systems quite often together, so things like blood pressure and heart rate. I think people get so many symptoms, and this is what's really hard about EDS, is that when you present somewhere with a combination of symptoms, quite often they'll treat things as individual symptoms. So when I tell my story in a minute, you'll see how that happened to me. And the reason why I'm doing this video is mainly to raise awareness, to educate people, because it's really important to do that. But basically, the time from first onset of symptoms to diagnosis for a person with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so they'll seek medical attention for an issue related to EDS, it takes on average 12 years. And like, it just blows my mind. Like, no one should have to suffer for 12 years without a diagnosis, and that's the average. So obviously some people are less, some people are more. I was exactly that. It took me 12 years to receive my diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos, from my first symptom to the day of my diagnosis. And that's just a crazy long time. Like, I just can't even believe that there's conditions in this world that take that long, and it's classed as a rare disease. But really, I don't think it's that rare. Like, I think it is rare, in the sense of there's not like every man, there's dog doesn't have it, but I think there's far more people in this world that have EDS than they realise, and they're misdiagnosed with other things, which is exactly what happened to me again. That's basically what Ehlers-Danlos is. The average onset of symptoms is age 12, and then the average age of diagnosis is 24. So it's quite more commonly onsets in sort of teenage years, which is when I got worse, but I've had symptoms since I was a child, really. So that is sort of the introduction, and now I'm just going to tell my story. So the reason I'm doing this is because I think it's quite easy. Like, you can have a Google, like if you want to know more, like Google it, like have a look at the different types and stuff like that. There's literally no point me sitting here and telling you what you can research yourself. And I think, especially as a healthcare professional, if I come across someone with a condition that I don't know about, I would just go and research it. And facts on the internet are something that everyone can access, but my story is unique to me. And that's why I've decided that I'm going to just sort of do this video, because I think for people who are like either newly diagnosed or seeking a diagnosis, or even not newly diagnosed, who've been diagnosed for years, it's just good knowing that someone else out there has had similar or different or whatever experiences to you, and hearing other people's stories and hearing things like, oh my word, I have that, or whatever. And if this helps one person, then it was worth my time doing it. So I'm just going to start like from the beginning. So from being a child, I was never, like, I've always been really pale. I've always been sort of really a bit weirdy, bendy in places I shouldn't have been bendy, but I've danced since I was 2 years old. So we just assumed, like, I did dance, I did gymnastics, like I did all of these kind of activities that encourage flexibility. So there was nothing untoward, like I was just bendy. My mum's really bendy as well. So like it was just me, like we didn't think anything of that. And I'll just put this out here now that having hypermobility and having EDS are two very different things. So just because you're hypermobile does not mean you have EDS, but hypermobility is a part of having EDS. So most people who have Ehlers-Danlos are hypermobile. It's kind of one of the sort of categories. So there's a scale called the Baton scale, which is basically a 9-point scale of hypermobility. So it's like in different joints, like whether you're hypermobile. And I scored 9 out of 9 on that scale. I know some people who are diagnosed with EDS that don't score 9 out of 9, and it doesn't always mean that you have to get a diagnosis, but it's something that geneticists use to achieve a diagnosis, basically. I always used to be that kid that like fell over in the playground and twisted their ankle or like scraped their knee, and it used to take like months to heal over, and like my parents used to be like, this scab's been here for ages, and I'm like, yeah, I know. Like there was just little things like that. And basically at the same time, I had quite a normal childhood, I would say, up until about the age of 8. And when I was 8, I got a urinary tract infection, which we think was caused by putting a bath bomb type thing in the bath. I ended up with an infection, so went to the GP, got some antibiotics, the usual process. And basically this infection just did not go away. So for months and months and months, I was on and off antibiotics, really confused. I started getting really bad pain. I remember being at my grandma's house and being sat in a chair, curled up, just in loads of pain, just felt just that I had a constant urinary tract infection. It just went on and on and on. So basically, long story short, I ended up being referred to my local hospital, who took one look at me, did an ultrasound scan, was like, everything's fine. But by this point, my bladder had started basically not functioning properly. So I was ending up basically not wetting myself, but sort of having a leakage all of the time. So my bladder was opening up, letting when I had no control over it, and I was ending up with sort of having to wear a pad on my underwear. Obviously when you're 9, this is horrifically embarrassing, and I was so annoyed about it. So I was referred to my local hospital, and then just said this is beyond us, we have no idea what's causing this. So they referred me to the RVI, which is still my regional children's hospital. So I was seen by a paediatric urologist, and he also was a surgical doctor. So he was fab. He did quite a few sort of scans and tests that were non-invasive, really just sort of monitoring tests and things like that. And didn't really find anything. Found sort of my bladder function was okay as far as it was aware, but obviously we just had this constant issue of infections that wouldn't go away, and this leakage. So basically this went on, and I just kept on seeing him, and they did a lot of investigation, and then basically just said look, we don't really know what this is, we can't work it out. But they kept seeing me because obviously it's an issue. Eventually the infections sort of stopped. I still used to get more than someone normally for my age. I used to get them way more frequently, but they used to go away with antibiotics. But it got to a stage where we really struggled to find antibiotics that would work because we tried that many. So I ended up on quite strong antibiotics at that point. At the same time, when I was about 9 or 10, I started complaining to my mum 9, 10, 11, it got worse as I got older. I started complaining that I was really tired all the time. And I've always been really active. My parents both work full time, so we used to get up at the crack of dawn, go to a morning club before school, go to after school club after school, and then I would have an activity on every single night of the week. So we just thought I was tired just from being busy. But it got to the stage where my mum was a bit right, okay, we'll go to the doctors. We went to the GP. And they did bloods, and they basically found that I was anemic. So I was always really pale and stuff like that. So we just thought, oh, it's just normal. They said it was my age, but my mum was she's not of puberty age yet, really. I wasn't particularly sort of advanced for my age, so I was still a child really. So it was a bit odd. And they gave me iron tablets, and it literally just would never come up. It'd sort of come up a little bit, drop back down, come up a little bit, and it just didn't work. So this was going on in the background. I was still being seen at the RVI, and they started doing more sort of investigations and things like that, procedures. And then my parents just said look, we don't want any more invasive stuff done. Basically we'll just leave it. I was coming up to my GCSEs and stuff like that. So skip forward a few years, and this just carried on in the background. My fatigue was getting worse and worse, and I was just starting to really struggle. I got to about 15, 16, and this anemia just wouldn't go away. And we went back I'm not even joking, probably in excess of 20 times to the GP, why is this not coming up, why is it still low? And they were oh, it's just you, you quite clearly that. But my mum was saying it's not normal, there must be a reason. So eventually we went to see this random, we had an appointment one day for something else, I think. And my mum mentioned to him, he was a locum GP, he didn't work at our practice, and my mum mentioned to him about the fact that my iron had been low for years, And he said, have you been tested for celiac disease? And we were like, what's that? So basically celiac disease is where it's like an autoimmune disease that causes a reaction in your body when you eat gluten. So obviously at this point, like, he was like, it's just a blood test initially, like we can just do it, and then if it comes back negative, it comes back negative. So they did it, it's like an antibody test, and it came back like sky high. So then they were like, right, well, we think you've got celiac disease, we'll refer you to a gastroenterologist. So at this stage I had like no gastro like problems as per se. Like I used to have a totally normal diet, like would eat and drink absolutely normally, like I absolutely love food and would eat all the time basically. So obviously for me, like having to take gluten out of my diet was going to be like a huge thing. So basically they did this what's called an endoscopy, which is where they put a camera down your throat and into your tummy. So I was 16 at the time, so I should have been offered a general anaesthetic, as well as like I should have been able to choose, but they didn't do that. They were really naughty and made me have it done when I was awake. I remember everything. They sedated me, gave me tons of sedation, and it just didn't work, which we now know was because of EDS, because sedation does not work quite a lot of the time in patients with EDS. So it was horrifically traumatic. I remember all of it. I was in a right state. I was 16, just about to turn 17. So I'd been referred to a gastroenterologist for the celiac disease. And basically they took like a biopsy of my intestinal lining just to check that what's called villi were flattened, which is a sign of celiac disease, and they were. So it came back, I basically had to go gluten-free. So I met this doctor and he said that, but then I basically, from the day of that endoscopy, I had horrific abdominal pain that used to come on when I used to eat, and it was totally new and we didn't understand it. And we thought something had happened in the procedure that they hadn't told us about, because it was literally like from the day that had happened, this started going wrong. So we didn't obviously like take it any further. Like I just used to go on my appointments for the first like year or two. They took obviously the gluten out of my diet and the celiac disease was resolved. So things sort of, I guess, normalised in that sense. I was still being seen by the team at the IVI for my bladder and things, and they just sort of came to a bit of a standstill and said, well, just basically get on with it, like we'll just keep monitoring it. They kept saying it was my age. They said like when I had gone through the full process of puberty that it would just stop, and yeah. So it was just basically ignored. Not ignored, but they didn't like go seeking answers, and there was more and more things starting to happen. In terms of like, obviously then we started with abdominal pain, and then I started suffering with like really bad nausea. So I was like feeling sick all the time after I'd eaten and stuff like that. And then it got to the stage where I would be like, I collapsed at sixth form because I'd eaten lunch. I like collapsed in the middle of a performance, which was really embarrassing. And like ended up in and out of A&E. I don't even know how many times. I used to be taken in. I've been ambulanced before, because obviously there's been like times when I would just be like screaming in pain, couldn't do anything. There was one time I woke up by myself like in the house, my parents were at work, and I had to ring an ambulance because I could not bear the pain that I was in. And basically I used to go to A&E, they would give me a dose of painkillers and some like muscle relaxant, and then would be like, we don't know, just go. So these are send me home, and eventually my mum like would say like, there's got to be something happening here, because this wasn't happening before. And they said stuff to her like, are you sure she's not trying to make it up? Like, are you sure that she's not like doing it for attention and stuff like that? My mum was like, no, absolutely not. Like, this is not like her at all. I was like on target for like A stars and A's in my A levels. I'd done really well my GCSEs, wanted to go to university, and my sixth form attendance just dropped because I just physically wasn't well enough. My fatigue got worse and worse and worse. I wasn't eating properly, so I was having to have like liquid only diets. I wasn't getting proper diets and stuff like that. Ended up trying loads of different things. They tried like low FODMAP diet, tried taking dairy out, like we tried loads of different things, manipulate my diet and stuff like that, and just it all failed. And my consultant was just a bit like, Jess, I don't know what it is. They just said it was like irritable bowel syndrome, and I was like, it's not that, but okay. The fatigue side of things just got worse and worse. And basically because I was starting to get like other symptoms, my GP referred me for an appointment to be not tested but sort of diagnosed to see if I had ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, so myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome, as it's otherwise known. And I went there and the guy was like, yeah, I think you have that, like you've got a lot of the symptoms that sort of concur with it. Basically there's nothing we can do, you have to come to like a rehabilitation program. So I went and like I just was like, this is not helping me. Like they were basically saying like I needed to motivate myself, and I was just getting really frustrated because I was actually the opposite of that. Like I just wanted to get on with my life, and I didn't need to do like graded exercise therapy. And that's not saying that it doesn't work as a treatment for some people, like that's just in my opinion, like I just knew that wasn't the right treatment for me. So basically like my gastro symptoms got progressively worse, and I was still being seen by the consultant for my gastro problems, but he was just at a loss and just said, I don't know what's happening. Tried to manage, like we tried like manage my pain and nausea and stuff with tablets and medication, and we were just going around in circles. And I just kept being admitted for a few days, and then I started vomiting, so I started like not just feeling sick but actually being sick, and it just sort of got progressively, it was just getting worse. And then it got to the stage where I actually had like quite an alright few months, and then I had like a major dip in like the October, November time. I started uni at Durham, and just really struggled. Like I hardly attended because I was quite poorly like all of the time. Just was obviously diagnosed with ME, but wasn't quite convinced. So essentially I carried on just trying my best. I went through a transition from paediatric services in neurology to adult services in neurology, and was seen by a doctor who was a bit like, right, I want to do some more investigations. I think there's something going on here. And at this point, I had my own medical rights as I was over 16. So I consented to have these procedures still that my parents didn't want because they were too invasive. And I just wanted an answer. I thought there's got to be an answer to something. Not really linking the problems together. So I had like different doctors. So I had like the fatigue, then I had the gastro problems, and then I had the problems with my bladder. And I was also starting to develop like problems with my joints, like really bad achy joints, problems with like temperature regulation, just weird and unknown random symptoms that no one could put together. I would get ill all the time, if there was a cold going around, I would be guaranteed to have it. No one could even figure out what was happening. And then basically I'd gone through transition and I'd seen this new doctor, and I had like reflected back on my like time in paediatrics, and I was like, you know what, like the nurses that I'd met who had like seen me and stuff, who sort of sympathised with the fact that we didn't have answers and were really, really great with me through everything that had happened. And I was like, I want to go and be a paediatric nurse. So I changed my uni, I left Durham, and I was having quite a good summer that year. So I was like, right, ready, like we're going to go for it. In the meantime, got a job at my old secondary school, was working as teacher assistant. So I had quite a good few months. Started my degree, and about 6 months in, just took a major downward turn. Mainly with my gastro symptoms, I was just really struggling to eat anything, like even liquids. I was really struggling to keep it down. I lost like a huge amount of weight, and basically I got seen by my consultant in the clinic, and he just was like, this is ridiculous, like we're gonna have to admit you to tube feed you like this. So this was like 4 years ago, and I was admitted, had my tube put in, and did really well, put weight back on, was functioning brilliantly, managed to get back to uni, completed my first year, started my second year. And then 6 months in, he was like, right, I think this is something we're gonna need to do long term. How about we go with a PEG? So PEG's where they put a like surgical tube into your tummy so you can be fed via that rather than having to eat all of your calories. You can basically like top up what you don't have. So I was like, fine, brilliant. Like it was a big decision to make because no one quite knew what was going on. To begin with, I was like, okay, like this is something that I think we're gonna have to go with. In the meantime, I had this procedure done in adult urology, and basically the person who did it wasn't my consultant, because he had actually passed away, and I didn't know about this. And basically the doctor who did it just decided that because there was nothing wrong, he was just going to discharge me. So I got discharged from urology services, which was just like, whoa, like 10 years of all of that, and now see you later. with no answer whatsoever. But it was the least of my worries because my feeding was going downhill and I was just like, right, we're just going to have to focus on this. So gastro symptoms wise, my diagnosis was irritable bowel syndrome and I was tube fed, which was just not, like, they were not concurrent with each other, made no sense. And basically I was on a placement doing my degree in accident emergency and I was on a night shift. And I had my NG tube in and I was in the staff room and we were just like sat chatting and I was talking to one of the junior doctors. She asked like what I'd been doing before I came into nursing and all of that. And I explained that I'd become a nurse because I'd been in hospital and stuff. And she was like, oh, well, if you don't mind me asking, like, why do you have a feeding tube? And we basically ended up this massive conversation. And she went, have you ever been tested for Ehlers Danlos syndrome? And I was like, excuse me, what? Speak English. So she wrote it down. And when I went back into the unit, it was really quiet. So I was like, right, I'm just going to have a Google of this. So I sat down, logged in to a computer, Googled it, and I turned to her and I was like, you have just diagnosed like 10 years, 11 years of problems, like in just one conversation. And I just instantly knew that everything she described, that everything that happened to me could be explained by the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I went back to my consultant, my gastro consultant, and said, I think I know what's wrong. He was like, I agree. Sent me to a genetics, because genetics have to diagnose Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And the doctor was like, overwhelmingly, like, yes, he did like the things like I was talking about before, like the flexibility testing and stuff like that. And was like, he said, I can say with extreme confidence that this is what it is. He said there's no actual specific genetic test for type 3, which is the type he thought I had. But he said, like, based on the clinical picture that you present with, you tick every single box. So I was like, I just felt relieved. I felt relieved that I hadn't been gone crazy and that there was an actual answer. And that basically we explained what had happened. So anytime something happens to my body, so the infection in my bladder or this endoscopy, anything that's invasive that changes the way that it functions, it then causes problems. That means that it doesn't go back to function how it did before. So essentially, like, my intestine, when it had the endoscopy, had stretched because they have to blow air into your stomach to be able to see, and then it had never gone back to functioning how it was before because everyone else's would have just gone open and shut. Mine went open and then just sort of like crumpled in on itself. So fast forward a little while and we decided to go ahead with the PEG, which was risky because of the EDS. But I was a bit like, I can't live with a tube in my face the rest of my life. Like, I've got to just go with something. This is something that I need. If it's going to help me to have a good quality of life, then it's worth it. Had the surgery done. The first time failed because they tried to sedate me normally again. And as I said before, sedation in Ehlers-Danlos doesn't happen. So I was awake the whole time. They couldn't do it. It was too unsafe. And they were trying to cut into me while I was wide awake and staring in the face. So that was not going to happen. So the second time they had to do it under an anaesthetic. And they ended up having to do it twice because they tried to cut it and then they couldn't get through because the tissues were all weird. And this is what the problem with EDS is that there's so many things that you can't predict are going to happen. It's just your body does things and you're like, why is it doing that? But basically we got the PEG in and initially it took quite a while to heal up, but it was all right. And I had like a summer, which was quite good. Like, I had my tube off my face, like recovered from the surgery and stuff like that. And then continued till October 2018 when I got a major complication from PEG, which is what's called a buried bumper. Buried bumper is basically where the back disc, so the PEG is held in place by a disc in the back, which is inside you and the tube comes out of you. And the disc basically mashed itself into my abdominal wall because it's stretched. So it stretched open and the disc shoved itself into all my tissues. And I'm not even joking, like, I've been in some pain, but that was the worst pain I've ever been in my entire life. I tried to manage it at home. I don't know why I did this. I tried to manage it at home myself for like, I think 5 or 6 days. I went to work. Like, I don't know how I was even functioning. It was ridiculous. And then I was at work one afternoon and I was literally crying, like standing up crying. And my mentor was like, you need to go and get it checked out. I couldn't do what's called advance and rotate it, which was a sign that it was stuck somewhere. So I went and they tried to free it, like, without doing anything. And then they basically admitted me and just said, like, we'll have to see. So they tried like pushing it out. They tried like doing it from the outside, and then basically like my consultant was like, we're just gonna have to go in and remove it. So I had to have surgery to get it out, so they had to like basically cut the tract open a bit to get it, pull it out. And he said like it had like basically migrated, so it was inside of where the hole was, where it should have sat. The disc should have been here and mine was like here. So I ended up with like a temporary tubing and stuff, and this admission just went a bit wrong. I was on quite strong pain relief, and then from that my stomach function declined again because it had another incident happen to it, and it had surgical procedure, and I literally was not tolerating anything. So then I ended up with a jejunal tube, which is what goes into your bowel, but by this stage like it just was not going well. I was really struggling, had been in hospital. I was in hospital for like 3 and a bit months, and then I eventually went home on IV anti-sickness, just so I could get out, and the hope was that things would settle down a bit with a bit of time, and then we could I had like a PICC line in my arm. In that admission I had sepsis once from a line, and basically like just had issues with everything. I was on morphine, I was on really strong drugs, and it just ended up as a bit of a mess. So eventually we sorted the tube situation out. I ended up with what's called a button peg, and a jejunal tube just to see if it would work. Ended up in a bit of a sticky situation when we took the IV anti-sickness away, and I could not keep a single thing down, couldn't keep water down. So I ended up back admitted, and by this point I was like a really underweight, was really unwell, to be honest. Like I look back at pictures and don't even understand like how I got to be like that, but basically I couldn't do like hardly anything. And a decision was made like 10 days in. They did like what's called a gastrographin scan, which is where they put dye in you and watch it go through, and it takes hours. Like you're an x-ray for like 4 hours because they take a picture like every so many minutes. And basically they saw on the scan that this dye went in and then went backwards and back up to my stomach, which is why I was vomiting everything, because what I had another complication of EDS. Well, it's a condition, it's all right, but a lot of people who have it also have EDS because everything's very stretchy and loose, and it's basically called superior mesenteric artery syndrome, and it's where your aorta and your mesenteric artery are too close together, and they basically obstruct your bowel. So like anything that goes in then goes back. So it's like a bowel obstruction, but it's by your own body, which is so weird. And the way of fixing it is to basically open up the angles. So I'd lost so much weight that the fat that was keeping it apart a bit had like sort of just closed on itself. So I was commenced on something called TPN, which is total parenteral nutrition, which you'll have seen on my other videos. Basically ended up in hospital for months. I was in hospital for 6 months again, so it's like a 9-month admission, including the other one. I went home for a week in between the 3-month and the 6-month admission, and it was like a really difficult few months. I essentially went home on the TPN and was stable for a while, then kept getting infections. So I had infection in a central line. It was a very long, drawn out story, but essentially I just kept getting infections. And then it got to December last year, and I had a third infection, and we were really struggling. Cleared the infection fine, but then when I started refeeding, which was a couple of days before Christmas, I was having these I felt a bit weird, like I couldn't even describe it. Like I kept saying there's something not right, and everyone was like, your bloods are fine, you're fine, like there's nothing wrong with you, like just stop being dramatic. They said you're recovering from an infection, like it's just that. And I was a bit like, no, there's something not right. And then basically I just was like, fine, I'll have to go home then. So I'd been having IV paracetamol for pain, and the day that after it stopped, so I had a dose at like quite late on in the night, and then the following morning I went to clinic at the regional centre who looked after my TPM, and I basically like passed out in the clinic, and they took my temperature, and I had a high temperature. So my body temperature, because of my EDS, is naturally like way lower than a normal person's. So again, that's another symptom of the EDS. And so they admitted me again and thought I had another infection, which I did not, but I'd become allergic to my TPN. So I'd become allergic to some component. They didn't know which component, so they sent me home with like a bag that had basically nothing in, and they were adding bits in. We fell at the first hurdle because the first key thing that they need to have everything else in is what I was reacting to. So I was basically surviving off like sugar and salt and water for like a few weeks. Felt really bad, but was trying to get to the end of my degree because it was like I had like 6 weeks left and I was just determined to just go ahead. I finished my degree on the 14th of February, and then I had like hours to make up from when I'd been in hospital the year before I could actually like get my pin and start as a nurse. And a week into these extra hours, I was not very well at work one day, and no one quite knew. I didn't know why. I just thought it was because I wasn't getting proper nutrition. And then the next morning when I got up to go to work, I collapsed on the landing with sepsis once again. So I was taken by ambulance to hospital and essentially like had the bug this time was quite bad in comparison to other ones, because it could have caused damage to my heart. So they tried really hard to get rid of it, and treated it like with obviously really strong antibiotics, and this is like the 4th time this had happened. So I had sepsis 4 times due to this line, and then it didn't clear. So they then took the line out, and then the decision was made to not put me back on TPN because I'd obviously been reacting to it anyway, and it basically wasn't successful. This was the most horrific week of my entire life, and I'm not really going to go into massive detail, but I was sort of treated quite badly at the end of that admission. They were a bit like, get out. This is when the coronavirus thing was kicking off, and everything was very messy. So basically I went home, and naturally I'd been fed via a vein because I couldn't feed via my intestinal tract. And then like I went to nothing. Like I just was told to go home and eat and drink, and that obviously didn't go very well, and I lost a lot of weight and was like literally some kind of zombie. Like I used to get out of bed, go downstairs, sit on the sofa and repeat every single day, feeling like rubbish. Had like blue under eyes, started getting really bad symptoms like low heart rate, and not sleeping, which now my doctors are saying, well, they're now saying that that's psychological, but it's part of the problem with EDS. Like it's so complex and they don't get it, and doctors find it really hard, and I get why. Like I can understand as a nurse, like something in front of you, like a blood test or a weight or a result from a scan is what you make your decisions off, because that is measurable, whereas how someone feels or how their condition affects them is not measurable. But with EDS it's such a big thing to have a non-measurable aspect, because everyone is so different. Like if I have an infection, my blood test doesn't show that. So like you could take my blood and it looks like I'm perfectly healthy. My bloods are so good at covering up like if I'm dehydrated or if I'm like there's something wrong. Like they don't do anything. Essentially like the team at Newcastle decided that I was allowed a short-term feeding tube, so here we are. And I don't quite know what's going to happen after this. It's obviously quite a difficult scenario anyway, especially with the coronavirus, but I think that this highlights like how complicated stuff is. Like I'm now under a new urology consultant because I started getting more infections again, and I got re-referred, and she is fab. She has basically said like, I don't want your bladder to worsen anymore, because I started getting like more symptoms of like further weakness and stuff like that. So she decided that to put me forward for what's called SNS procedure, which is like a nerve stimulator. So it's like you trial it first like with an external battery pack, and then if it works they do it again with like an implantable device. It's a bit like a pacemaker for your bladder. So that's like my next thing really, after we've sorted out my nutrition. And I've had a really difficult time the last few months just trying to get believed that there's something wrong. Like people have been saying like that the symptoms that I get are just because I don't like them and stuff like that. And it's so difficult to stand in front of someone and be like, my body doesn't work properly in any way, shape or form, and you're just dismissing it because you can't see it. And to the naked eye, without this tube, I look completely healthy. Like I look totally normal, and have no other like problems. I take over, I think I counted them the other day, I take over 15, wait, no more than that now. I take over 17 types of medication, have like patches, liquids, tablets, you name it, I've got it. And basically like it's just difficult because I've got like no venous access left. I'm 23. Like it's just, there's so much that complicates it, and the list of symptoms is just endless. Like I could sit here all day and rhyme off. I'm not going to do that, but my joints are now more unstable. I get dislocations, I get like subluxations where it partially comes out. I obviously have major gastric issues. I have major issues with my like healing. So if I cut myself, it takes ages, and it's just so difficult to deal with. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's like great, because it obviously isn't. Like, no one with a chronic condition would tell you that it's amazing and the best thing that's ever happened to them. But I will tell you that it's made me who I am today. And I'm one of the lucky ones that got a diagnosis. It took 12 years, but we did get it. And without that diagnosis, like, who knows where I would be, like, who knows what would have happened. And it's quite scary to think that people are out there with suffering all of these things that I was suffering, and continue to suffer with, and that they continue to not be believed just because, like, there's doctors in this world that don't believe it exists. And when I tell you that I know like hundreds of people with this condition, like, on my social media from around the world, and I just think like it's incredible that people still question it just because you can't see it. And it's just such an old-fashioned view of what disability is, and I think it's a massively needs to change. And that's the point of Awareness Month. The point of Awareness Month is that it's educating like people in the world that actually this exists, and that if one person who suffers with some different symptoms sees a video or a post or something on social media and thinks, actually, you know what, I think I might have this, and can get some kind of diagnosis or help, or some kind of input from a medical professional that's actually helpful, then it's worth our time doing this. And I'll finish by saying that the sign for EDS is a zebra, and people often ask me why, so I'm going to finish by explaining why I am a zebra, and why the Ehlers Danlos logo is a zebra. And the reason why is because zebras are obviously like a horse type animal, and there's a famous sort of like phrase that is taught in medical professionals, and I've even had it said to me like in lectures and things before, and it's basically, it's if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. So that phrase means think of the most common thing first before you think like some weird rare disease. Because we get labelled with having so many other things. Like, I was misdiagnosed before I got my correct diagnosis because people look for the most common thing first. No two zebras have the same stripes, and that is exactly the same with Ehlers-Danlos. Like, one person that has it has totally different symptoms to another person that has it, and it's the same disease, it just has different like features in different people, or different types of the same feature. So like, I know some people that are wheelchair users because of their joints, whereas I am but eat okay, not that they don't have gastric symptoms, but they can eat. But then I also know people who, like me, have had major gastric issues but actually can walk and have some level of normal mobility because of different, like, it just affects people differently. And I think it's really important to put out there that zebras exist, because I am living proof that they exist in a world where people think that they don't. And if this helps one person think that they may be a zebra, or that they encourages them that it's okay to be different, because there's been quite a lot of times where I've just stood and just thought, like, why am I so different to everyone else around me? Like, why do I have such a different body? Like, why can't I just have a normal functioning body? But I'm proud to be a zebra. Like, I'm proud to have the condition I have, because I think if I can do some good in this world and make it easier for the generation behind me, like, it's really difficult. Like, it can affect your ability to have children, but that's something that I really want in my life. And it's scary for me to think that I could pass this on, because it's genetic, and it's dominance. There's a 50-50 chance that my children could have this. And if by me now pushing this to be known about makes, like, potentially their lives or lives of other people in the future, or the generation after me, the generation after that, easier to deal with this diagnosis, then that's incredible. And I hate and love being a zebra all at the same time. And I'm really sad because I ordered zebra tape for my tube, but it didn't come in time, so I have a unicorn instead. But yeah, like, thanks for watching. I know this is a long video, but it's quite, my story is long, and that just shows how complex EDS is, shows how complex it can be, and how difficult it can be to navigate because of that. And sometimes it just takes someone to pull the puzzle pieces together. And I'm so thankful that I met that doctor. I wish I knew her name. I wish I could thank her, because she has no clue how much she changed my life by me having that conversation with her. And I truly believe that I was meant to meet her, because without her I might still not have an answer, which would just be horrific, and I might not actually even be here, because I might not be taken as seriously as I was, because now when I present to somewhere I have a diagnosis, and it scares some people because they don't know a lot about it, and I'll always try and educate people. So if you mention it to me, I'll bang on at you about it, because it's important and it's a huge part of who I am. It's not all of me, but it's a huge part of me. And I guess happy EDS Awareness Month. And if you have watched this, I'd really appreciate if you could share, like, just like send it to a friend and be like, hey, do you know about EDS? Like, do you know what that is? And just to educate people, even if they watch the first 10 minutes and don't listen to me ramble on about a story for the next half an hour, then that's fine. But thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video.